Welcome back to Season 3 of Skills Recharged. I'm your host, Michelle Beatty, Professional Development Strategist, and we are here today with Episode 5 with our special guest, EEO expert, Nicole Webb. Nicole, welcome to Career Tipper Podcast.
Thank you for having me, Michelle. I'm so excited for this episode.
Awesome. Well, tell the listeners about yourself and what do you do?
Absolutely. As Michelle stated, my name is Nicole K. Webb. I'm the owner and principal consultant of NK Webb Group. It is a professional development company and HR consulting company that specializes in equal employment opportunity compliance. So what that means is anywhere from diversity and inclusion initiatives, workplace investigations, sexual harassment trainings, or any other type of compliance training.
This is great because during this episode, Nicole was going to share insight on how and why diversity, equity, inclusion is a skill that can be developed and contribute to you adding value to your workplace. Because Nicole, I know like when we talked about, I was telling you that I was taking the class, the certificate, I was completing the certificate program through University of South Florida for their diversity, equity, inclusion. And I'm like, Nicole, I feel this is a skill, but I'm not sure if this is a skill. And you're like, Michelle, it's a skill. And I'm like, okay. Yes, ma'am.
It's definitely, information that you can learn over time and certainly apply as you're in the workplace.
Okay, so tell us, how can professionals, give us insight on how professionals can develop skills related to diversity, equity, and inclusion? Like, what's a baseline? Is it mindset? Is it just observation? Is it education? Because I just proactively took the class just for my own knowledge and understanding as a project manager, and then just also in Career Tipper, and it's being tossed around so much right now with everything going on in the world. So
absolutely. So to your point, definitely, I feel like since the murder of George Floyd last year, everything has been about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And unfortunately, that had to come about as a result of his death. But I think sometimes when unfortunate things happen, it's an opportunity to birth ways in which we can further the movement for equal civil rights going forward. So with that said, when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, I think what really needs to be taught to people is the importance of equal employment opportunity, also known as EEO. Now, with equal employment opportunity, this was birthed out of the initial landmark case. It's Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which was a landmark case initiated by John F. Kennedy, President John F. Kennedy, back in 1963. But after his assassination, it was actually pushed into law by Lyndon B. Johnson, his predecessor. So that landmark case created this landmark piece of legislation for civil rights. Now, with Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, it prohibits discrimination against job applicants and employees in the workplace based on race, color, religion, sex, and national origin. I think first and foremost, for employees to understand diversity, equity, and inclusion, they need to understand where this was birthed from. And this is from this landmark piece of law.
Now, Nicole, let's just go back just a smidge and share your journey of becoming an EEO expert, because you're just like, listen, I got the statutes, I got the numbers, let me break it down for you. So can you just share with the listeners your journey to becoming an EEO expert, because it's quite phenomenal, your journey to becoming an EEO expert. So share that with us, please.
Absolutely. So 16 years ago, I started in an entry-level role in human resource management. And if you know anything about HR, the fundamental parts of it is pertaining to employment law. So given, being in that industry, you learn about EEO law, which is what I just mentioned with the Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. About 4 years into my HR career, I had an opportunity to serve as a diversity, EEO, and affirmative action training specialist. And this was only 4 years into my career. I took I applied for the opportunity, I competed, and I was selected for the opportunity. And I loved it. I loved everything about being in a position to advocate and help those individuals who were a part of marginalized groups and who needed assistance with equal access to all rights that they were entitled to in the workplace.
Now let's fast forward to like right now today. There's a lot of sensitivity in the workplace, and some may feel the need to develop their DEI skills, and some may not see the importance. Like they're like, I get it, but I don't get it, or I'm not an HR professional, so I'm just over here in my lane. Why is it something that we all should treat as a priority to understand in the workplace, or those that are just solopreneurs working with vendors or small businesses? Like, why is it important? Why should it be top of mind? And why should someone make it important to them?
Absolutely. When we all go to work and when we sign up for these jobs and take on these opportunities, we want to go to work in an environment that is comfortable, that is friendly, and that is free of any type of issues, especially when it comes to issues of discrimination and harassment. And I understand that sometimes people don't feel like that's their role or their responsibility. But what people have to keep in mind is you never know when you may be on the opposite end of an issue, or someone that you know and love may be at the opposite end of an issue. So I try to promote to people to understand that we all have a responsibility for fostering a fair and equitable workplace. And sometimes some people have more influence than others. So I really believe that we have to treat it as a priority, because if we don't, situations do spiral out of control, although they may not initially involve us, but they may impact us in some type of way in the long run. And it's just the right thing to do.
Okay, so say there's initiatives where different employers offer training and things of that nature. Why should it not be dismissed?
Well, one, employers should be making these trainings mandatory. These should not be optional trainings. What a lot of employers have to realize is that when you have 15 or more employees, they have an obligation to the Federal Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which is the enforcement agency of non-discrimination laws, to make sure that they're complying with various laws. Because if they don't, if an employee is, harassed or discriminated in some type of way, they have every legal right to file a formal complaint against that organization. And that could possibly lead to some type of monetary benefit and their names in the media and, smearing their reputations. So we have to stop looking at these trainings as optional duties, but more so mandates.
Understood. Now, what about a solopreneur? How should they keep top of mind for DEI and when they're interacting with their customers and with their vendors?
Well, I think with solopreneurs, since they are usually the deciding forces within their companies, whether it's just them or they do have a small staff, they need to invest in training. Not to say that you need to be an expert, but you need to have a fundamental training and understanding of what equal employment opportunity requires and the various D&I initiatives that you may have to enforce within your company or just simply be aware of, so that when you're dealing with your clients or potential vendors, you can make sure that you are complying with the law and not doing anything that may be a potential violation and cause you issues.
Now, where does the starting point for someone to learn? Like they're like, okay, Nicole, I hear you. Is it LinkedIn Learning? Is there a specific resource? Like, where is the starting point for someone to self-educate beyond their work environment?
I would highly recommend visiting the EEOC's website. Their web address is www.eeoc.gov. That's Gov. Again, free information. It's a website that's easy to navigate, and it has a plethora of information that you can use to give you basic understanding. It is not, it's not a website that just has too much information and you'll kind of get lost in it, but it gives you very basic understanding of what the law stipulates, what rights employees have, what could be potential violations. And they also have a learning center through the EEOC as well. So you can actually sign up and take some free training courses, but also some at a minimal cost, maybe like $98 or so. And I mean, I've taken several. I do know that LinkedIn Learning has a number of different trainings as well. So I would say start with the Federal Enforcement Agency, which is EEOC.gov.
What are examples of diversity skills?
All right. So when it comes to diversity skills, I would say one, starting with yourself, you should be your true, authentic self when you come to work. And what I mean by that is you should not have to act a different way. You shouldn't have to speak a different way. You shouldn't have to be anything other than yourself. Now, and I will clarify this because there's a lot of talks about what you should be able to wear and what you should be able to look like at work. You do have to understand when you are working for an organization, they do sometimes have policies when it comes to certain type of attire that is appropriate versus, inappropriate. So I do think it's important to comply with the dress codes unless you have some type of maybe religious accommodation need or something like that. But outside of that, I do think you should be your true, authentic self. Two, I think you have to be able to respect other people for being them true, authentic selves and understanding that there are people that are different than us, but that's no indication that we should be judging them or, making comments, inappropriate comments or things of that nature. And third, I would say also when it comes to communication, just be open to communicate with people that are totally different from you. Because I think sometimes naturally we kind of gravitate to people who are just like us because it's familiar. But when you're at work, you have to understand that people come from different backgrounds, different skill sets, different career paths, but just be open to learning and engaging with people who are different than you.
Okay, Nicole. So what are some skills that enable equity and inclusion in the workplace?
So when it comes to equity, I think this is a little interesting. And this is to me more so for like management and those individuals in positions of authority and influence. But when it comes to equity, I think it's important for leadership to understand that just because you see something as fair does not mean it's equitable. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with, there's a little picture that's been floating around the last few years of 3 kids watching a baseball game in a gate. And all 3 of them are given stepping stools to see over the gate. One, he's tall, one is like mid-level height, and the other one is extremely short. So initially, they all were given the same stool to be treated as fairly, meaning everybody received the same thing. Now, the first 2, they could see over the gate just fine, but that third kid could not because he was a bit shorter. So he had to be given a third stool so that he could be seen over that fence. And I think it's important to understand that sometimes we have to give some people just a little bit extra so that they can have what they need to be productive and effective at work. So what is fair is not always equitable. So that's one example. Another example that I wanted to give is pertaining to pay when it comes to pay inequities. And in order to be equitable with pay, a lot of times management and again, HR folks, when they're looking at salaries, especially when they're hiring new people to come into an organization, they should not simply just be assigning salary amounts based on what an individual negotiates with and not taking into consideration what those who are currently, employed with the organization are earning. And I say that because a lot of times these pay inequities are existing because they're not taking into consideration the internal equity within that company. So I say that to say, whenever a new hire is coming in, or if someone is potentially being promoted, management, HR folks, they should be looking at the entire picture of everyone who serves in that same role or something similarly situated, along with those individuals' education and experience, to come up with a pay rate that is not only fair, but equitable based on what everybody brings to that role and what that job pays. So again, when it comes to equity, personally, I think that's more of a focus for management and leadership, those in a position of authority and influence, but not necessarily those that are in non-management roles. Now, when it comes to inclusion, I do believe inclusion is everybody's job, from the janitor on up to the VP. And I say that because inclusion is all about making people feel like they belong. So some examples: when you see people, say hello, be friendly, be kind. If you see someone struggling with something, offer to help them. If someone asks you a question, don't dismiss them. Take the time to try to assist them. If you can't do it directly, direct them to where they need to be. It kind of reminds me a lot of when you start a new school as a kid, being the new kid, and you don't know anyone. It usually takes one kid to come up to that person and offer to help them. We shouldn't have to do that in the workplace with adults who are expected to be grown up. So again, when it comes to inclusion, it's all hands on deck. This is everybody's role and responsibility.
Thank you. I love the passion, Nicole.
I know, I got to calm down.
Love it, love it, love it. Okay, so what are some team building activities that can be done to get DEI cheerleading moments going on within the workplace?
All right. And I know I say the same thing over, but I know what works because I've been doing this for 9 years. But I do think it's important that teams are taking basic fundamental non-discrimination training. So not just Title VII, not just learning about Title VII, but also the other non-discrimination laws, the Americans Disabilities Act, the Pregnancy Discrimination Act, the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act. You have to learn the fundamentals of what the law stipulates and what those potential violations look like. So that way, then you can move on to a civility training, how to interact with other people, how to check your bias at the door, or how to address conflict with your fellow colleagues or potential customers. So I think when folks are looking at training initiatives, when it comes to D&I, sometimes we put the cart before the horse and we go straight to D&I initiatives without understanding the foundation of the EEO laws and what they look like.
Those are great shares. Now, I think there's a lot of people that do not know how to check their biases. What's the starting point?
And definitely an unconscious bias training. And being open to attend the training, because a lot of times some people don't feel like they have any issues. They think they have it all together. But you and I both know that we have biases as well. But the mere fact that we know we have them, we recognize that we have them, is the starting point. Being able to be open and honest with yourself to recognize that you have bias and that when they show up, you have to check them or remove yourself in order to maybe get assistance from someone else who can be impartial to assist with whatever you're working on at work.
Okay, and what are some examples of bias? I don't want to function from a place of assumption. So what are some examples of bias, of being biased?
Absolutely. So I'll give you an example. Let's say if you have an employee who requests a training class, to attend training, and this employee maybe has had some performance issues in the past. And let's say the manager receives requests from 2 employees. One is a outstanding performer. This other one is satisfactory, but they've had some performance issues, but they've been fine. Let's say that supervisor says, well, you know what, I'm going to approve the outstanding performance training, but this other one, you know what, I'm not gonna approve this because they've had performance issues and I'm not sure if I want to waste money on paying for this training because it may be a waste of time. Well, that's that supervisor making that assumption based off of past experiences, but not recognizing that, well, you know what, this person recognized that they're in need of training, and this may be exactly what they need to improve the performance issues that they've had. Let me do everything that I possibly can to assist them so that they can be successful. So that's like a basic example of bias. If you want something a bit more complex, let's say if you have an employee, I call them frequent flyers. Sometimes you have employees in the workplace who always have issues. And let's say they file a complaint of harassment. And let's say the investigator receives the complaint, they see it and say, well, I know this is a no probable cause. I know this didn't happen. This is a problem employee. They always have issues. And let's say they just do a mediocre investigation and close that case out without leaving no stone unturned. And then come to find out that person had a true case that could have led to a finding. That would be an example of a bias, because again, you judge that person based on past experiences, but not taking that specific situation, as treating it as its own and going through the process.
Thank you, Nicole. Is there one nugget that you would like the listeners to remind themselves of as they enter certain environments, work environment, nonprofit environment, when volunteering? Is there one nugget of like wisdom or food for thought from the EO expert's mind that you think that they should have when they enter a meeting, not many people are in events right now, but just in networking? What is something that you would like for, if you had like this one wish, what would that be? And what would you want people to think about when they see people, when they interact with people, to help make it a more inclusive, not only work environment, but just interactions just with people in general? What would that be?
That's a great question, Michelle. I would say give everyone a chance. Give everyone a chance to show you who they are. Everyone is different. And just because you've had experiences at previous workplaces doesn't mean that that's going to be the experience at your current workplace. So I would say, give everyone a chance, be respectful, be friendly, and take the opportunity to get to know everyone for who they are.
But isn't it amazing, Nicole, how sometimes we can take those experiences like from one job to the next, or just one department to the next? Everyone's career trajectory is different. But sometimes I don't think we even realize the impact of certain experiences where we are judgmental or biased. And it may be listening to something like this interview, or reading an article, or just maybe something on social media, wherever people consume information, and it just makes them take a pause and think about it. Like, maybe it is impacting me more than I realize, and different things and how I interact with people.
Right. Well, I think with growth, you learn to recognize that every situation is different. And that's because, one, like you just said, all of us have our own different career journeys. I mean, we all have stories. And sometimes the characters do repeat at different workplaces. It's like, wow, you remind me of this person. But sometimes, it's totally different. But bottom line is, we have to recognize what we are to learn at every, in every work environment, because a lot of times these experiences are really designed to teach us about ourselves. And every experience is an opportunity to grow. And when we move on and move up, we have to be sure to implement that growth so that we can continue to excel and really impact those around us.
Now, Nicole, you are all about systems and protocols. So what are a few of your favorite, or just one of your favorite productivity tools?
All right. So that's another good question. And I'm very, very basic. I am still I work with my pencil and my little notebook, my little journal. But on Sundays, I plan my entire week. Like Sunday evenings, I am looking at my calendar for the week and I'm mapping everything out. And what I tend to do is the night before, every work day, I'll kind of go back through my list of things to do as well. So I'm definitely a planner. I've learned many of lessons that when you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So definitely avoid that.
In the DEI conversation that we're having, one thing that keeps popping up to me is solutions. And sometimes people do not have the answer initially. They've gone through the trainings, they've taken the necessary partnerships. What mindset do you think people should practice when identifying solutions and working through solutions, and accepting the outcomes that come along with that, be it something that they were looking for or something that takes them right back to the drawing board of figuring out something? What type of mindset would you encourage people to have when that? Because this is not necessarily a warm, fuzzy experience for people when they're going through this, because it's almost an awakening for some people. Some people it's highly emotional. So please share your insight.
So, and I hope I'm answering your question correctly, because like you said, a lot of people, they implement these solutions, they find out that they don't work and they're going back to the drawing board. But I think that really comes down to a lack of understanding what your issues are and needing to recognize, one, where do I start? And I think a lot of companies have issues because they're skipping right to D&I initiatives without doing a proper assessment of the overall organization in terms of what does our employment pool look like? Meaning, what does our staff look like when in terms of race, gender, and other EEO-based categories, and comparing that to what is available in the market. So when you look at those two things and you see that, hey, the market has X amount of minorities available, but we only have 10%, that's a big problem. So that needs to be something that needs to be worked on. That needs to be a priority item versus, oh, we're just going to do a whole bunch of diversity and inclusion trainings and we're going to get a couple speakers. Well, that sounds good and it looks good for publicity, but what is your true issue? Identify the true issues that are going on within your house so that you can fix them. So I think the biggest thing is being honest with yourself, being honest about the organization, doing a proper audit. Start with an audit. Where are our issues? Let's identify our issues, and then we can create a plan so that we can come up with some solutions.
Love it. Thank you, Nicole. Now, it seems ever appropriate. I want to talk about allyship in the workplace and how to undertake it, how to approach it, what does the conversations look like, and sensitive, just from everything. Just give us a good education.
Absolutely. So I do think there's a misconception that allyship, it can only be taken by those who are non-minorities, but that's not necessarily true. An ally can be anyone in a position of authority and influence over, compared to those who don't have that power and influence. So if you are someone who is in that type of role and you have that type of power and influence, you definitely need to use it. Don't stand by idle, just happy that nothing's happening to you and you don't have any issues and you can go home at night and lay your head down. You have to understand that you have a responsibility to do your part to make sure that everybody's being treated fairly and equitably.
Yes, ma'am. Well, thank you, Nicole. Now, I want to end the episode with you sharing a prize career lesson, because your journey, you just shared a little bit of it, but your journey has been vast and you have your own initiatives that you started. You're the CEO of your career. You do a lot of different things. You want to tell the listeners about that initiative?
Sure. I didn't know if I should go that deep, but sure. So like I said, I do have my own consulting company, but by day, I do have a 9-to-5 as well. I do work as a deputy director of equal employment opportunity for a private organization, which I will not disclose. But also I did create a workshop about 3 years ago entitled Be the CEO of Your Career. And that workshop is designed for ambitious career professionals who undertake career ownership, meaning that they understand that their career journey and trajectory is their sole responsibility, and they are not to rely on any external factors or individuals to determine that for them. So I am an advocate for doing what needs to be done to move forward in your career, whether it's investing in yourself, paying for training, paying for classes. I'm going to do any and everything that I have to do for my career to move forward.
Love it. Now I want to loop back to what is your most prized career lesson that's kept you keeping your stride, to keeping your skills recharged, just being the expert that you are, part of your evolution to being the EO expert that you are?
Absolutely. Treat your career like your own business, like your own company. Like I said, you are the CEO of your career. If you are looking to get promoted, if you are looking to, get additional education, yes, it's great to ask your employer, but understand that they do not have that obligation to you, but you do have that obligation to yourself. Always invest in yourself. I've been doing it for the last 10 years. It has served me extremely well. There's never been a time when I was not being contacted for other opportunities. Although I was employed, even during the pandemic, I've had at least 2 offers in the high 6 figures to go elsewhere and serve in an HR role. So be the CEO of your career, take ownership of your career. It's yours, take charge of it.
Okay, Nicole, I just want to loop back around again before we sign off. I want you to share with the listeners that might want to, they listen to this episode and they're like, okay, I think I want to work with someone one-on-one, or they're planning an event and they want to have an EEO expert come in, speak about developing their skills in this area. What are some things that they should look for? What does that look like? Because I know like a lot of people right now, generally speaking, are deeming themselves as a DEI expert. And I would just like to know, from my own understanding, and I'm sure some listeners will, what qualifies them to be a DEI expert from your perspective?
Absolutely. That is a great question. I'm glad you asked. Please do not fall for, just seeing the title in their posts or, on LinkedIn or Instagram. Pay attention to their actual background in terms of the work that they've done. When it comes to someone who really understands D&I and know how to implement it, you want to have someone who has experience with employment law or someone with a vast background in human resource management. I would say other than that, I would say steer away from them, because as Michelle alluded to, I feel like everybody's a D&I expert right now because there's such a need for it in various workplaces. A lot of people are capitalizing off of this movement, but just make sure that you select the right person based on their skill set. So like I said, anything ranging from employment law to human resource management.
What about people that are applying for EEO expert roles and they perceive that they have the skill set? What is a way for them to, other than reading the role, how can they prepare to be a qualified candidate?
Definitely. I would highly recommend, I mentioned earlier, doing your research so that you can understand various non-discrimination laws, but also get familiar with various HR processes and practices when it comes to recruitment and selection, how the recruitment process works, how the selection process works, how many people should be a part of a interview panel. Also, you need to get familiar with the investigation process, or I should say the complaint process. Let's say if someone feels like they've been violated in terms of their EEO rights, you need to have a basic understanding of what it entails when it comes to filing a formal complaint so that you can conduct an investigation. A really great resource would be the Society for Human Resource Management, also known as SHRM. That's SHRM. SHRM is a really great resource. You can apply to be a member for only $40 if you're a student. But if you're just, a professional, I think the fee is about $180 annually. That is a really, really great resource that I highly recommend to those in human resources or any type of administrative business role.
Nicole, is there any additional food for thought that you would like the listeners to think about or research further?
I do. I just want to leave you with some statistics from the Federal Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. And that is, in fiscal year 2020, they had a total of 67,448 charges filed by employees and job applicants throughout the United States. Number one, race came in at number one with 32.7% of charges filed, and sex came in at number two with 31.7% of charges filed. Now, keep in mind, when they refer to sex, that does include gender, sexual harassment, sexual orientation, and gender identity and expression, but they didn't, kind of explain it further in terms of the total percentage, individual percentages. But what I wanted to point out with this, I think is very important for employers to assess their workplaces in terms of the type of complaints that have been filed internally by their employees or with external regulatory agencies such as the EEOC. And based on those complaints, that will give them an idea of the type of trainings and different initiatives that they need to come up with. So for example, let's say they had 10% of the complaints filed within the organization were for sexual harassment or 20% was based on racial discrimination, then that's an indication that those are the type of training initiatives that they need to implement. So again, it's great to have diversity and inclusion training, but that training can be broken down based on the type of needs that you have. So a lot of time, the information is right there within your organization, but you have to pay attention to what's being told to you. And the employees, they're telling. They're sharing this information. They may not be coming directly to the manager and saying, hey, this is what I need. But when they're filing these complaints, when they're speaking up in these meetings, all of these different resources and things that are out there and available should be taken advantage of, but it starts with listening to your employees. Talk to them, solicit information to find out what they need so that you can foster that fair and equitable work environment.
Thank you, Nicole, because skill takes muscle time to develop. So you got to develop the skill, work the muscle so you can respond strong and well and appropriate.
Absolutely. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you. Can you tell the listeners how to get in touch with you?
Absolutely. You can get in touch with me through my website. You can find me at www.nkwebbgroup.com. Also, I'm on LinkedIn under my name, Nicole K. Webb.
And you can find me, Michelle Beatty, at careertipper.com or skillsrecharge.com. Please listen and subscribe to the podcast on your podcast platforms. And you can also find us on YouTube. If you enjoyed this episode or any other episode, please leave us a 5-star review on iTunes. Thanks for joining us today.